Hello everybody and welcome. I'm Nolo2 and thank you for watching this video. We got some more teasers here for the Tunnels of Terror expansion coming out on April 12th for Back 4 Blood. We got 2 weapon teasers and some card teasers. We'll get to the cards last because I think that's the juicy bit here. But I mean, speaking of juicy, we have the Tenderizer. It's going to be a new legendary melee weapon. Disembers enemies upon impact and deals explosive damage in a large area. My take now on seeing these legendary weapons is that they're going to be part of the reward for completing the Hive dungeons in the middle of your campaign, because it seems like the Hive dungeons will be hidden throughout your typical campaign. Sort of risk reward thing that you can do with your team, and if you risk it and get the reward, you could be finding yourself with a tenderizer. Big old, like, I don't know, dynamite shells on the front of it. Curious to see if this will have a ammo capacity on it. It might have ammo capacity for this particular weapon, and maybe you can still swing it after you've used up all the ammo in it, because there might be a limit. I don't know. Speculation, right? I can only imagine, though, that swinging this thing is probably incredibly slow. So having a melee character on your team, depending on how good this weapon is, could be a meta thing to have, because that melee character will naturally be running around with, like, Brazen, Meth Head, right? The attack speed buffs for melee weapons. And I would also imagine that having this in Berserker is probably real ridiculous. I assume that one swing that blows up a large area of zombos will trigger multiple instances of Berserker. If so, then Berserker will become even more of a good card for melee. Yeah, so kind of neat, kind of exciting. Kind of exciting. The next thing we got here is the Damnation. The Damnation. It's got Hellfire written on the side, right? It also looks like all of the legendary weapons will have their own custom skins to further separate themselves from their weapon counterparts. But incendiary rounds ignite the target. Ignite the target. This could be really cool because of a card like Pyro. I assume Pyro might be triggered off of this, and potentially if you shoot a burst of shotgun shells into a horde of zombies and light them on fire, not only will Pyro increase your fire damage, potentially this will result in the zombies being burned out, giving you temporary health. And now all of a sudden, if you find the Damnation and you're running Buckshot Bruiser and Pyro, potentially a lot of temporary health to be had. There's some new temporary health synergy going on. So interesting to see exactly how this works. How long do things stay on fire? Will this fire sort of melt tall boys like Molotov sort of do at the moment? So kind of cool, and some really interesting synergies here where you can even potentially build a deck around the idea of hoping, or around the idea of you potentially getting one of these legendary weapons. Like having Pyro synergize with this gun in particular could be really, really interesting. An interaction that I've never thought of before. And again, like, it gets me excited for like future, even further down the line content where like these legendary weapons have special perks and abilities. It's almost like having another card in your deck essentially by running this weapon. So kind of super cool and exciting. I think I'm more excited for this. What this entails more than the Tenderizer, just because this gives me the idea that like you can do all kinds of crazy things with weapons to potentially increase the content and replay value of the game. But now the cards, new cards coming. I can't remember how many they were going to release. I think they said 15 plus, right? Or 17 plus. They gave like a weird number plus, which means that it's going to be less than 20, but more than 15 or something like that. But they wanted to keep it a secret. They wanted to tease it. Anyways. Six cards. Six cards. I'm going to talk about them. I'm excited. The deck building aspect of Back 4 Blood is my favorite part of the whole game. Love building the decks. I just love it so much because I have a card gaming background a little bit here with the Hearthstone, Pokemon trading card, literally all of them. But we're gonna start with left to right here because that's how we read. Bodyguard. When a teammate within 5 meters is attacked, You instead receive 50% of that damage, can trigger once every 3 seconds. Kind of exciting. Um, doesn't sound very exciting if you have bad teammates, but this card, this is the first card in the game that I think truly can put a character into an archetype, a particular role, right? Because you can sort of say, like, on the melee character, I got damage resistance and temporary health gain and all this other stuff, right? And so I'm the tank, right? If you can focus the game's damage into that player who is generating extra health as damage resistance, that's a tanky character, and you sort of mitigate how much damage the game is trying to give your team. But a little more circumstantial. This is the first card that like truly like your existence, your very presence will improve your team's survivability with Bodyguard here. So kind of cool, kind of exciting. I like this idea. Cards in general, a typical sort of philosophy for card design in a lot of games is that you do want good cards. You do want good cards. At the same time, though, it is totally perfectly okay to make cards that are actually bad. It's okay to make cards that are bad, so long as those cards give you an idea or inspire you in some way. So I think when people see a card like Bodyguard, they're going to go, "Oh man, like so I can absorb other people's damage, and then I'll take this card that allows me to heal, or I'll take Scavenger support and make sure there's always enough items on the map for me to heal myself and my teammates, and also too, right? So let's talk about what this card synergizes with. Bodyguard is going to synergize perfectly, and I mean perfectly, with Charitable Soul. Right? Remember that card that says you receive 50% of the healing accessories that you give to someone else? Unbelievable synergy. That's the card that I talked about, like, sort of circumstantial. Like, I'm typically better than my teammates, right? Ha ha ha. And I don't typically end up needing to heal myself a lot of the times, but my teammates need the healing, and so I don't feel like I get the value out of Charitable Soul if I were to run support. But if you are going to run, you can be, so now you can run Bodyguard and be like a melee character and be that designated tank. Any extra splash damage that happens around you that you miss, you still absorb it. But also, if you're going to be a general support character, and you have Charitable Soul, and then maybe you're stacking up your support pockets, and you got Support Scavenger and Poultice, you can also run Bodyguard. And with Bodyguard, you pretty much guarantee, that Charitable Soul will trigger to some effect. Kind of interesting, kind of exciting. Some things to note. Will this 50% damage that you receive be affected by your damage resistance? Will it cause trauma to you? I leave that to Swing Point to figure out in the future. But really cool to see that this card will put a player into an archetype, being a tank, being a damage absorber, but it also synergizes with some cards. It's going to synergize with some cards. So if you didn't think about Charitable Soul, this card will guarantee that Charitable Soul triggers, and that's super cool to see cards interact with each other in that way. Because again, just in the future, there's as more cards get released, the deck building will get more robust and interesting and more dynamic. I think Bodyguard is a really good sign of that happening. Weaponsmith allows the ability to unbolt attachments from weapons outside of safe rooms. Unbolting attachments costs 400 copper. Additional copies of Weaponsmith will reduce its cost by 100 copper. This is a card that people were asking for. I want to give a little illustration here. In Hearthstone, when Hearthstone was in beta, there's a class. Though there's like, what are there, 9, 8 classes or whatever, and there's more now. But there was a card for the Priest class in Hearthstone. It was called Mind Control. It used to cost 8 mana out of your potential 10. And what Mind Control did is it let you take one of your opponent's creatures and put it on your side of the board permanently. It became your creature. It was essentially remove a threat and gain a threat for 8 mana. People hated this card. People hated playing against it. It did not feel good to have your stuff stolen and then having to fight against it. It could be a huge swing of potential or a huge swing of momentum, it felt like, for a lot of people. People just did not stand Mind Control. They hated the card. Blizzard, the maker of Hearthstone, had the data, and their data showed that in no way Is mind control overpowered or broken? Mind control is fine. The stats in mind control didn't indicate anything at all. If anything, mind control was underperforming as a card. It was not a very good card, but people hated mind. In response, Blizzard nerfed mind control, despite it being a card that didn't need to be nerfed at all. They nerfed it to 10 mana. Kind of an interesting illustration here because this is a card that I think should never be ran. This is a card that is no, you don't need this card. I have a video on how to attachment. It's literally called Back for Blood How to Attachment. I'll show you a very simple idea concept as to how you can gather your attachments while waiting for the right weapon, and then so long as you have enough time, you can comfortably swap those attachments over to your weapon between the next couple of missions. And it's really no big deal. Right, but this is a card that people are complaining about. People couldn't stand the attachments. People get so upset when they see attachments, they put them on their gun, and then 5 minutes later they find a new gun, and they're like, man, I wish I could put these attachments around. Wouldn't it be cool if there was a card? But now there's a card. So if you're somebody who can't stand the attachment system, who just didn't understand it, or hated running into that scenario where you would just get stuck with your attachments or the wrong gun, you have to choose between leaving behind your low-level gun with the good attachments for the better gun, and right, if you didn't like that dilemma, or didn't like thinking about how you should be strategizing around attachments, you no longer have to worry about it. With that being said, 400 copper, that is so much copper. That's a lot of copper. That's a medicine cabinet. And I've said before, health is our most expensive resource. It costs tons of money to keep yourself healthy. That's going to cut into your keeping yourself healthy fund. So unless somehow you can guarantee that swapping this attachment will guarantee prevent some amount of damage being caused to you or your teammates, quite the hefty price. And if you want it really cheap, like free, because you have all four players are running it, and you have Weaponsmith as free, that's 4 card slots out of your 45 or whatever. I don't know. Maybe I'll look at this in a team setting, but otherwise, this is a card that I don't think needs to exist. But if you're happy to see this card, I'm happy for you. But I think this is a crutch. This is a crutch. You're smarter than that. You can overcome. I believe in you. Pumped up. Okay, pumped up. Your temporary health decays 20% slower. Interesting. I don't know how long or how fast health decays at the moment. 1 additional pain med spawns in each map, and you get plus 5% health. Plus 5% health. Your temporary health decays 20% slower. I'm assuming that maybe this is a second. I want to say that temporary health decays once every 5 seconds or something like that. Maybe it's faster. Because, I mean, if it's not 5 seconds, then 20% is less than a second worth of time saved. So I don't know if I'm particularly excited about that. But 1 additional pain med spawns in each map. Kind of neat, kind of interesting idea. Like, we have the scavenger cards that are very ambiguous as far as more of a thing spawns on the map, but we don't know how much. Not very quantifiable. Here is quantifiable. +1 thing will spawn on the map guaranteed. So kind of neat. Potentially a card that you can, selfishly, build a deck around your temporary health. Maybe you're a melee character, maybe you're running amped up, or Buckshot Bruiser or Pyro, things like that. So there's some really nice synergy for some of the temporary health cards out there with this pumped up card. In addition to that, it also helps your teammate as far as providing 1 additional medical accessory, which is kind of cool. And it just gives you more health in general. So this is a really neat card. This is a card that I think you don't build a deck around necessarily, but your other decks that happen to evolve temporary health, a great support card to put in there. So kind of cool and exciting to see. I love these. I love the idea of just more cards here. Fit as a Fiddle. Team effect plus 25% team bolstered health plus 5 team health. I think the last time I talked about bolstered health, I didn't know what it was. I now do know what it was, but I think Swing Point's already beaten me to the punch. He knows what it is. But bolstered health is a imaginary increase to your maximum health, essentially. Bolstered health is your overheal, your overshield. You're familiar with like Doom, where you can typically have 100 health, 100 armor, but there are things in those games that increase your health and armor above 100. Turok has it as well as I think Doom, Castle, the Wolfenstein. Wolfenstein might have had it as well. The idea of having overshield or overhealth is like an old school shooter concept. Duke Nukem, I think, had it as well. So essentially, if you have 100 points of health and you were at 90 out of 100, and you pop some pain pills, you would go from 90 to 100, but your first 10 points of health would be temporary. If you had bolstered health and you were at 90 HP out of 100, and then you pop those pain pills will take you all the way up to 125 points of health, with your first 35 points of health being temporary. You might think that's not such a huge deal, and I think it's sort of okay. There's some interesting things here going on that we can potentially take advantage of with Team Bolstered Health, or Bolstered Health in general. One, temporary health blocks trauma damage, so long as the damage is absorbed in its entirety by the temporary health. The funny thing about that, though, is in order for you to take advantage of your temporary health, like some pain pills, you need to take damage in the first place. So you're pretty much guaranteed to suffer some amount of trauma before you can start taking advantage of the trauma reducing effects of temporary health. That is no longer the case if you have bolstered health. So you now can potentially preempt pain pills going into a fight and guarantee that you suffer less trauma to some extent. At the same time, if you combo this card with Charisse, right, with Charisse, who gives you another 25% temporary health, you can pop pain pills before leaving the safe room. You can have 150 points of health right out the gate. When it comes to experienced EMT, you no longer need to shoot your teammates if you have bolstered health on your team, because you can just insta pop pain pills anyways, because you don't start the next mission with temporary health anyways. So if you have bolstered health, it's not an issue now to like open up the safe room door and then shoot somebody, and then it's like, well, do I use a bandage on them, or now I need poultice? But if you're going to be support, if you're going to be support, you should have poultice. You should have poultice anyways. But kind of a neat idea. I made a team composition video for Act 2, right? We take advantage of Act 2 because Act 2 is by far the best act for Amped Up as a card, which Amped Up gives you 25 temporary health, or 25 temporary health each time a horde is called. And in that team composition, we only had 3 Amped Up. And I just sort of figured, with this team composition and what's going on, chances are most of your team won't end up getting full advantage of the 75 points of health. That's a huge chunk of health to have. And it's probably the majority of your max health. So unless you're constantly on the verge of death, 75 is probably around the sweet number as far as, on average, getting the most value out of it, but not always without overkill. But now, with the team bolstered health effect, potentially, Amped Up gets even better. Fit as a Fiddle makes Amped Up even better. If you're going to run Amped Up, you could potentially make a good argument for Fit as a Fiddle. If you have 4 players running Amped Up and also Fit as a Fiddle, you start off Fit as a Fiddle, 4 players, that's 200 points of health possible, with 100 points of it being temporary. And then if you're also running 4 Amped Ups, every horde trigger is going to be putting you light years above. So if you have 4 Fit as a Fiddle and Charisse, plus an extra 5 points of team health and maybe Walker and other cards and basic cards that you found along the way, we're talking about potentially having health pools on all 4 of your teammates, 250 to 300. Can you imagine having that much health? So there's a lot of potential health gain here in the temporary health world. And now that we're at numbers that big, pumped up, all of a sudden it looks really good. Because I was looking at it from like, how much seconds do we save per point of health? That's maybe not the right way to look at it. Maybe the question should be bigger. If I have 100 points of temporary health, how long does it take for that 100 points of health to go away. Whatever that is, it's now 20% slower. So if it takes a minute for 100 points of temporary health to go away, it's just longer. And I think a minute's too low, right? So interestingly enough, there's some really crazy temporary health synergy stuff going on here. And now, and now you're a character who's got 150 points of temporary health going on and Bodyguard triggers, and like there's some cool health synergy stuff going. Just some cool synergy in general. But potentially having constantly amped up being triggered, 100 points of temporary health. Fit as a fiddle, you're constantly above 200 HP. Gonna make No Hope easy. New Hope must be insane, maybe. Magician's Apprentice. You have an additional 10% chance to not consume accessories when used. This is like the ultimate gamble card. If you have Hyung on your team, this 10% becomes 15%. And maybe if you're running bandages, I think it's up to 15%. That can be some cool synergy there, as well as like with the barbed wire, things like that. For the most part, though, mathematically, you would say for every 10 things we use, whether it be a quick, a support, or an offensive, any 10 times we use something between those three categories, we should get one of them back. But that's how it looks on paper. 10% rolled 100 times. You might roll 100 times and get 1 to 10 0 times. Like it's just not a lot. So it's ultimate gamble, and essentially, right? If this is an economy card in one way you can look at it, as far as like if I get a grenade back, that's 150 copper worth of value. So if I want Magician's Apprentice to be better than Hazard Pay, it needs to trigger twice per mission. Better than Share the Wealth, it needs to trigger 3 times, right, to be better than Share the Wealth. And we could look at it from that perspective. At the same time, though, there's only so many cards that give you more resources in the middle of the match. The scavenger cards do that, and Pyro does that, right? Hoffman does that. So essentially, the other way to look at this, though, is just having the ability to throw the things that you need to at the time that you need to freely. I think there's some real potential here with this card, but it's just so gambly. I don't know. This card might work really well with like Hoffman or running Pyro or having scavenger cards, because those things are going to give you the most opportunity to take advantage of this card over time. So kind of a cool card, potentially a fun card. Having infinite grenades, we all know how that goes, right? So Magician's Apprentice takes you into the step of that, having infinite grenades. Economically, if you get like a medkit reuse, then obviously there's more value in that. But this is a card that gets better as your accessories get better. Potential value there. So kind of a neat card, but not the most excited about it because it doesn't really synergize too much with things, though Pyro it synergizes with, because potentially you can maintain your Molotov economy while still generating Molotovs and etc. Bravado. When a teammate within 15 meters receives trauma damage, gain 10% of that amount as trauma health. My take on trauma health is that this is going to be reducing your trauma. Let's say if you have 10 points of trauma and then somebody suffers 10 points of damage, you recover 1 point of trauma. That's my take on this. So I don't know exactly what trauma health is. I thought we've always seen it regarded as trauma damage. So I could be wrong on this if trauma health is something else. But my take on this is as your teammates suffer damage, you recover trauma. That's my understanding of this card. It could be wrong. As a solo queue player, this card has some interest as far as like, oh yeah, like if my teammates are worse, the stronger I become. It's a really interesting concept to have. And again, just like all these cards, this card makes me sort of excited for future content cards, because this card has this idea of like, oh yeah, if my teammates suck, I can run this card It will increase my chances of success and my chances of solo clutching despite my teammates. I can get value out of having bad teammates by having Bravado. So potentially an interesting line of thinking for future cards. Probably not a good card though. This card probably just doesn't compete with like Fresh Bandage. So having the trauma heal in mid mission, sort of like oh, what's the new support card that heals trauma now? I can't remember. Field Bandage? Field Bandage, yeah. Um, Healing trauma throughout the mission could potentially be beneficial for melee characters who are constantly ebbing and flowing on their trauma damage, but maybe have battle less, so their bravado will constantly go up and down as far as their trauma, and then give the value to battle less to keep healing health over time. I don't know. I don't think there's a whole lot going on with bravado, unless I'm missing something here. But kind of cool stuff. Very excited to see these cards. Cannot wait to see the other cards between like Bodyguard pumped up and Fit as a Fiddle. I think just a nice little glimpse into all the potential new interactions that we could be having in the deck building. Just with this release and in future releases where even more cards are coming out and there's more weird interactions. I want the deck building to have so many cards and more confusing, and you can make really, really dynamic and strange decks. So super cool. Inspiring me to get back into the deck building aspect of the game again. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I will see you in the future.